Thank you. I'm just going to get started with a project that I created for Bard opposite Frank Gehry's building. So I thought it would be appropriate to start with another Frank Gehry building that is what I call this beautiful piece up on the hill. It's the Performing Arts building at Bard, the Fisher Center. And how do I dance with the diva? Very quietly is my response. So what I created was from Frank's building and approaching, you actually don't see my building. It disappears completely as a grass oval in an outdoor amphitheater. And that's sort of what it looks like from the parking lots as you approach down. Right now, historically, they were using the lab, the field as a place where they'd put up a tent. So instead, I'm giving them an outdoor amphitheater for outdoor performances. But meanwhile, since the slope of the site of the meadow it's in slopes 2 stories down, we're able to expose all the practice rooms to 30-foot windows that face the woods. So you can look out from the practice rooms and see the woods and from Frank's building, which I think is this gorgeous statement. I just wanted to respond to it gently, so to speak. The meadow that the building is in is completely full of invasive weeds. It's a sort of a wetland, so we're restoring the meadow as well as creating a new wetlands in front of it. Second project I'm going to talk about is called the Confluence Project. It's a 6-part series along the Columbia River. It was created at the 200th anniversary of the arrival of Lewis and Clark to the west, to the ocean. And the state of Washington invited the tribes that were along the river, along their path in the state of Washington, to be involved, and they had asked if I would be involved. As I was met by the tribal elders of the Chinook, the Umatilla, the Nez Perce, they asked me to get involved because they said, excuse me, Lewis and Clark didn't discover these lands, we were here. So my goal was to teach a deeper history of the place, using Lewis and Clark a little bit as a lens. They give us a moment in time. They wrote down and recorded what they saw exactly 200 years ago. The first site that I began with is where Lewis and Clark arrived at the Pacific. Their goal was to get to the crossing, to the ocean. And so you were met by the most incredible estuary, the Columbia River estuary, on the right-hand side, and the goal of Lewis and Clark to arrive at the ocean on the left. And this is what we were met with. And this is going to be something that comes in to a lot of what I talk about. I love working in neglected, underused, or underutilized spaces. I was met by parking lots and restroom facilities. This is a state park, a beautiful state park, and so we restored it completely to natural dunes and grasses. This is the path on the upper part that one leads to the ocean, one follows the original water's edge, and that leads to a private little glade in the forest. And again, this is a path that leads to the ocean, and inscribed on it is the entire journey that Lewis and Clark wrote down, mile by mile. And you'll notice how many different Native American tribal homelands they crossed through. So even within Lewis and Clark's text, I was trying to make you aware of a deeper history of a place. Exactly 200 years since the day Lewis and Clark arrived, the Chinook tribe, whose homeland you're in, blessed the site and invited me in. And on the right is the inscription that they sang at that blessing ceremony. And with it, they invoke nature in a very different way, not mile marker, not sort of measured. Teach us and show us the way. So I asked permission to inscribe that incantation on the oyster path that follows the original edge. So again, I was trying to say, at times, the differences between how the West and how the Native American traditions looked at nature differently are definitely separated. And that's that pathway that leads you into a private glade. But more importantly, here we are again, it's the parking lot. And they were about to double the size of the parking lot on one of the most incredible estuaries, the Columbia River estuary. And so my first response as an artist was, could we have a transportation study? And lo and behold, after the transit study came out, it turns out they didn't need to double it. In fact, they allowed us to take half that parking lot away and turn it into an accreted grassland, so the water that used to flush through the pavement, bringing the chemicals of the cars into the water, is now being cleaned before it's shunted out. As an artist, I had no intention to make a work of art here. My belief system with this type of an artwork, I'm in a state park, is to actually not call attention to myself at all, but to disappear and leave you exposed back to the water's edge, which again was blocked by those artificial hedges. But there was one thing I did leave at this first site. I was caught off guard by this rusting fish cutting sink that was just there, and I must have taken 1,000 photos of it. And the people who brought me out, they were getting a little worried why I was so fixated. So I brought in a basalt obelisk from locally nearby, and on it I inscribed the creation myth of the Chinook tribe, which is of cutting a fish the wrong way. From the blood of the fish in Eagle Springs flies to a nearby mountain, which you can now see from this point, and lays an egg. And when the egg hatches, are born the first peoples, the Chinook. So as you now cut your king salmon there, you will actually read the creation myth of the Chinook tribe and know whose homeland you're in. So I'm always trying to ground you in your site. Hopping from that to a project I did, I'm from southeastern Ohio, and throughout the region are these beautiful, mysterious, ancient burial mounds of the Hopewell and Adena tribe. This one is in the shape of a serpent, eating an egg. And so I went to Sweden, to southern Sweden. I was invited in by the Vannes Foundation, and there's something funny about that serpent mound. When the early European settlers first came to the West, to the America, they thought, certainly, there's a bit of a myth, certainly these effigy mounds that they found were too sophisticated for the people to have made. Certainly people from Europe had come over, made these, and then went back to Europe. So I decided to bring a little bit of southeastern Ohio to southern Sweden, and I made this in the driveway of the Wachtmeister estate. I was asked to make an artwork for Vannes, and most of the artists have installed works in the woods, and I kind of need a little elbow room when I make art. And so I asked, did they have any open land, and did they have any fill, any dirt that they needed to get rid of? And Marika started laughing. You'll notice a building under construction. This was quite a few years ago. They had just built a state-of-the-art organic dairy, and they had a mountain of dirt they didn't quite know what to do with. So we ended up using the entire fill to build 11-minute line, which again was my first idea and exploration of how does a drawing have so much personality? Why do some lines look so modern and contemporary, others look like they're almost ancient? So I played with that notion and created a line. It's called 11-minute line because that's what it took me the first time. And most of the year it's devoted to the cows. There was more talk about whether the cows would like it or not, but if you'll notice, cows like pecking orders, so they like being up high. So the piece actually crosses itself twice. Most of the time it's 3 meters high. The rest of the time it's, and when it crosses, it's 6 meters high. And then when the cows are in the barns at certain times, you're allowed to walk on it. But again, for safety reasons, you have to wear special booties because of contamination. So that's the piece in southern Sweden. And it's led me to a piece I actually can't tell you where it is, but like the one that was made for the cows, this one was made for, or will be made for, dragonflies, the flutter of bird wings, and the pattern earthworms make when they're traveling underground. So it is a piece that is a complete rewilding of a calciferous landscape. It will be a piece that will be something that restores a landscape that they're losing a lot of their chalk landscapes. And this is just where it is now. It's in the conceptual phase. And it is, again, based on the first time I saw the site, there were so many dragonflies fluttering around. So I started thinking about animal movement and pattern. Because it's a rewilding site and because they're bringing back all these species that would normally live in a calciferous landscape, they needed south-facing basking banks for salamanders and little invertebrates. So that's sort of an idea of what the piece will look like. Again, I can't tell you where it is. And then this one is one closer to home in New York. It's for Storm King Wavefield, but what you might not know about this piece, this is about 11 acres. It was a gravel pit that had been formed when they were building the thruway. It was a brownfield site, and Storm King hid it behind, you can see on the upper right, berms of earth. The Goldsworthy piece stopped right before those berms of earth, and they were actually afraid to open up this temporary cap. So for about 7 years, they'd call me up and it's like, do you have an idea? Do you have an idea? And I finally presented an idea, and within 3 hours after presenting it, I called them up and I said, look, there's only one thing I've always wanted to do. I want to reclaim this brownfield site, and I want to create a wave field for it. So they called up the state EPA because their concern was the state EPA would be reluctant. The state EPA was so excited for an artist to actually do a permanent resolution of what was a temporary fix. And I based it on water and the flow of water, and this is a naturally occurring water wave, which is actually very symmetrical. It's called a Stokes wave. And my dad was a ceramicist, so I worked with clay my whole childhood, and so I make my models oftentimes in this plasticine. It's an oil-based clay, so it doesn't dry. And so the scale of this third wave, I wanted the waves to go over your head. So they're 18 feet, 18 to 20 feet tall. These are just construction sites, and this is what it looks like today. So it had to dialogue with itself, but also dialogue with the hills and the surroundings. And again, there was no plastic piping. We pulled the rocks from the site to create natural drainage underneath. Ecologists come up to study it because there are two of the rows have much more water, so you'll see a lot more butterflies and dragonflies. So there's different ecosystems happening within each row. And then this is another piece that I completed a few years ago for Princeton. It's called the Princeton Line. I put a fountain up at the top, but I could not resist. There was this hill that people were just hiking up it. It was a completely forgotten place. Nobody quite knew what to do with it. So I figured if I created an earth drawing through it that could welcome you in to different pockets where you could sit, that's what I would do. So all of a sudden, this kind of brought attention to an area that was basically a forgotten space, which I love doing. I'll have one last artwork. So a lot of my artwork deals with water, whether it's recycled silver, or I also fell in love with it's a recycled industrial glass marble. This is how does a river overflow its banks? So this is the Ohio River as it hits into the Mississippi. And there's been massive floodings because of heavier rains in the early springs. So for the Wexner Center of the Arts, they invited 3 women Ohio artists in, Jenny Holzer, Ann Hamilton, and me. We were each given a gallery to install in a show called Here. And I decided to ground you in something dealing with climate change and water. So this one's called How Does a River Overflow Its Banks? So it starts, the tributaries are behaving naturally, and then all of a sudden, at a certain point, there is so much excess water, I negated the river on the floor and only show you the reach of the flood. And it's made, again, out of recycled marbles, and then it just takes over and becomes the entire floor of the gallery. And from that, I'll go into a piece that is part of a project called What is Missing, which was mentioned at the beginning. It's called Ghost Forest, and I was asked to do a piece for Madison Square Park. Now, those are temporary works, and I tend to work in a very permanent way when I make a work of art. And so I had to think And it took me, again, 7 years. They were very patient. And they just kept calling me up. And I finally said what I'd really love to do, because I had to touch the ground lightly, and yet I knew I wanted to do something with trees. I didn't know what. And so this is the first sketch I did. It's an idea. How about bringing a ghost forest? So forests around the world are in die-off, as we know, because of climate change. In the West, where I am, it's beetles that are surviving these much warmer winters. You get about 3 years, the first time the trees turn red at the top, and within 3 years, an entire stand is killed. Sadly, because I knew I wanted to find a ghost forest near to New York, the Atlantic cedars are being inundated by salt water as water rises. So I chose a stand, and one night in, I think, early March, April, 50-foot high dead Atlantic cedars were delivered to me in the park, and then you drill a hole 8 feet down and you plant it. And the idea was the piece would be up for an entire living cycle season of all the trees in the park. The trees dialogued with the living trees, and of course are in stark contrast because they kept graying out more and more as the city trees leafed in. And that's how it looks. I tracked my entire carbon footprint, every truck, every staff member who made trips, every truck that had to ship the trees in, all the work. They calculated it was about 5.3 tons of carbon, and I wanted to offset that. So in the fall, 1,000 trees and shrubs were planted throughout the 5 boroughs to offset, and the Natural Areas Conservancy calculated that it would offset our footprint tenfold in 10 years. So the Madison Square Park, when an artist comes in, they do a lot of public programming. So our first kickoff was on nature-based solutions to climate change. So I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record with regenerative agriculture and the life of soil, because it is a key to fixing and saving biodiversity and reducing emissions. So with that, I'm just going to start in. So I started a project which asked a question: what if a memorial could jump form? What if it could exist in multiple sites, in multiple places? It's like water, it's free as long as you share it. And I probably started working on this maybe 10 years ago. No, 20 years ago. And so this is called the empty room. The installation you're seeing, you pick up a piece of optic plastic and catch an animal or species and learn about it. But we started with a permanent piece at the California Academy of Sciences. You can curl up in our master's voice. And we produced at the start in 2009 over 75 1 to 2 minute almost scientific haiku poems. We're quoting from NGOs, environmental groups, scientists, just trying to get us to see the environmental movement as a whole, as a family, and learn about what we're missing. This is how it started. The MTV billboard in Times Square, when Earth Day gave us their billboard, so we created a special video. I had an odd request from Philip Lim, would I help him with his 10th year anniversary? And I said, not quite my topic, but if you help out what is missing. So one day, 200 tons of organic compost came into a warehouse in New York City. It became a fashion show, and then the entire Philip Lim team then went and repurposed that soil throughout, again, parks within and around Manhattan. But what we did, because again, this is a guerrilla art project, we asked Philip Lim to open up his Rolodex, and out he sent, did you know, as part of what is missing, that 1/3 of all soils have blown away? The UN predicts that within 60 years, if we continue with the heavy agriculture, almost hybrid seed that we will have all our soil, topsoil will be gone. So it's almost key critical that we begin to think about regenerative agriculture that can both reduce emissions significantly, bring back the life of the soil, and help with biodiversity. So we just put out some fun facts. What's the largest irrigated crop grown in America? Can anyone guess it? No, the American lawn. And this is the toxicity of the present American lawn. We also give you fun facts. Did you know more gasoline is spilled refueling lawn equipment every year than what was spilled at the Exxon Valdez? So again, through missing, I'm trying to use facts, but maybe put them in a way, sometimes with the sense of humor, to get you to be aware of what we're doing. We also linked to the Perfect Earth Project and told you what you could do. That's 50% of your land given back to nature, and then it tells you what to do with the other 50% about making it sustainable and toxin-free. For Storm King, again, I did a piece that dealt with the secret life of grasses. Did you know that medium-sized grasses can have an 12 to 18-foot root structure that absorbs more carbon than the tree canopy in certain places? So we planted 3 different native grasses. Actually, one was Kernza, which is a cultivated grass that is one of our first experiments with a perennial wheat. Because most of our crops are annuals, which means that's where you start tilling it. And though you can do regenerative non-till, most people till it under, which is, again, where the erosion is happening. So we also shared this information. The last great hope of avoiding catastrophic climate change lies in the soil beneath our feet. And of course, Ghost Forest was part of that project. We just had a show up at the National Portrait Gallery in the Smithsonian, and I asked them to put one whole thing devoted to missing, where what we ask you online, give us a memory, something you or your parents or your grandparents have told you that is either missing or has come back from the natural world. So I'm going to try to make you aware of what might be missing in your own backyard, and then their facts and what we can all do to help. So the culmination is a website. It's called whatismissing.org, and it basically asks you, presents ecological histories of the planet, but also gives you solutions and also gives you some macro thinking about the project. So this is the phenomena. Jared Diamond refers to it as landscape amnesia. Daniel Pauly refers to it as shifting baselines. How can we protect it if we don't even realize it's missing? So the phenomena happens not just to these issues, the scale of species, the abundance of species, the longevity of species. It also happens because we know what we know at our point in time. So do we realize that a cod was larger than a man in the 1890s? Do we realize that lobster were taller than me when the Europeans first came in? So we do in-depth ecological timelines of cities, species, and waterways. Most of the places we've chosen to live at were abundant due to water. First you see sewage, industrial pollution, and then you see a growing awareness and legislation enacted to protect these places. And lo and behold, my mantra under the whole thing is nature's resilient. If we give it a chance, it will come back. And we tell you how it comes back. So these are some of the stories behind Manhattan's harbor. There were so many oysters. I think they calculated how often they cleaned the bay, and then oysters began to taste like petroleum, and now they're beginning to come back. The sturgeon were so plentiful that they gave away caviar free at the bars. And now seals are coming home, whales are beginning to enter the harbor. So again, I do ask of everyone here, go to whatismissing.org, give us a personal memory. Here's one from the Mediterranean. Sea life of all kinds. I hope you can read that. I'm not going to bother to read that. And then I'm just going to talk about the biggest point is linking habitat loss as one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss with reduction of emissions, climate change. They're linked. And so we can save 2 birds with 1 tree by protecting and restoring habitats and reforming our agriculture, our ranching, and our forestry practices. So this is just a little clip. So getting back to the emphasis of solutions, this is what I'm after, the intersection between the main drivers of climate change, or 50% of all emissions coming from habitat degradation and loss, and it's the largest threat to biodiversity loss. So again, broken record, nature-based solutions could potentially offset over 45 to 90% of all emissions, and it can also more than triple protected lands and water. So I'll just go quickly through this. What if we invite nature into every aspect of our lives? What if we consider the garden to be farming, ranching, forestry, and even our urban environments, of course? So I'll just quickly go through that. Invite nature in to the most urban of our areas, and I'll just give you a few things we do. Second most traded good economically after oil is coffee. The difference in species biodiversity is 20 to 50 species can inhabit an industrial farm versus 150 of species of birds can live in a organic shade-grown coffee. And here's another one we do. What if we all ate 20% less beef? We free up enough land equivalent to all the protected land in North America and 50% of the land in South America. And as far as nature-based solutions, what it would cost, it's what we spend on tobacco. And I'll leave you with 4 last slides. What if we could curb climate change? According to the World Economic Forum, it would take 1.6 trillion annually to mitigate climate change. That's what we spend on alcohol. So again, as an artist, I'm going to try to get you to think of the problems we face, maybe in a way with a little bit of a sense of humor. I'm not saying don't have that drink, I'm saying buy 3 more for the planet, but to get you to think about it in a different scale. And here's the last one I'll do. How much space would 8 billion people take up if we all lived at the population density of Manhattan? The answer is the state of New Mexico, or the country individually of either Paraguay, Poland, the Congo, Oman, or Vietnam. So people generally don't say, oh, I don't want to live like someone in Manhattan. They go, that's it? So you've got to think about our impact on the world. We touch over 90% of the planet at this point. And thinking about it's not population, it's land use and resource consumption. So can we imagine rearranging the lights? And I certainly believe through what is missing, through what I'm doing as an artist, I'm going to try to give you and show you plausible future scenarios that balance our needs with the needs of the planet. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maya. Thank you so much, Maya. It was wonderful, and you invite us actually with this experiment into something that is extremely important for environmental history. When you tell people, okay, can you recollect something that has disappeared? Can you recollect that and remember that and then tell that story? Well, that's actually a very interesting way to broaden the scope of who can bring this, history together, and so that we can protect better what needs to be protected. So that was really wonderful. I'm sure there must be questions in the room. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Vas-y, Vasilis.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was really great.
Thanks.
You mentioned, obviously, the land use, but also soil.
Yeah.
How important is soil, and how much is soil being transferred, transported, changed, altered around the world, and what can happen there? What is the frontier of how soil could be used in more appropriate way?
We're at dire straits with the way in which we grow our food. The massive impact of fertilizer is killing the soil. After World War II, there was a famous battle in England about whether we bought into fertilizer. Fertilizer were bombs. It's how bombs were made. So from swords to plowshares, the environmentalists lost the battle. And the minute you start flushing out, and basically it's it's turbocharging the soil. So they're now then addicted to the fertilizer. The complexity of the life of the soil, we still don't understand, but I think in a cup of fertile soil, there's 1 billion microorganisms. And what they've been doing to fix the oxygen into the soil, again, that's where you're going to get your greatest return. The key is, and the problem is, with climate becoming so unpredictable, if we do not bring back the life of the soil, then within X number of years, and especially, it can't withstand a drought. So the argument is that if we do not go into regenerative, no-till, organic processes, the UN predicts we have 60 years if we continue with the industrial agricultural practices that we have. So there's, I brushed over it, but regenerative, no-till. For ranching, eat less meat. I like Michael Pollan's eat less meat, mostly plants. But I think you can do silvopastoral, so your ranching lands become very rich in biodiversity. So I think it's vital.
Other questions? Grégory.
Yes, thanks so much. It was very impressive. I think so that something that is missing between species and memories, that's languages. I mean, all the words in all different languages of the world were able to give a word to different kind of soils, to species. In Seychelles, they had 80 words for bananas. They have only 4 now. In Brittany, where I come from, this small region of France, we had 20 different words for soil. The soil was going on with the wind, the soil that was very thick, etc. And all these languages was lost, and the species with that, and so the memory with that. And so his language, words, can be part of your project.
Critical, I think, and I'd actually love to know if you give to Martin some of the words for soil. It's the same thing when we were looking into the disappearance of ice, and that there was a whole argument with the entomologists about how many words for snow there are, and then someone said, oh, we've romanticized it. And then I did the research. We didn't romanticize it. There were like 50 words for snow in the Arctic regions, and I would love to know about those names. Another thing, as far as I started doing a little research. As we do timelines, we don't have a strong one of the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean, I started doing research for, and I'm asking for help, because my idea was I'd build a website, and it's a framework, and then get volunteers who love ecological history, who would want to share and help build timelines for their regions. The Med becomes the preeminent lifeblood for so many regions. It's also the tragedy of the commons if we keep up what we're doing. So knowing, I think there's a report that the ocean current, the currents within the Med operate the closest to the ocean. And I think the ability to show, and again, after Hurricane Katrina, there were all these mappings of what New Orleans could look like, thinking of ecology. And I'm sure there is one of the Med, but also just people that know kind of the history of the Mediterranean basin from an ecological point of view. We do try to create our timelines that are very high school kid friendly. They're teaching tools, they're not as academic, they're accurate, and we love to quote from literature as well as from firsthand accounts. But this idea that citizen science has been used for birds, I was trying to use that as a way to teach us a deeper time history about a place, trying to get you to fall in love, not be depressed that, oh my God, there isn't this type of abundance, but to really go in awe of what the planet has and could have again if we protect it. And also, how do we make the caring of the environment kind of more personal as well? And so I think I'm trying to get you to almost fall in love with your own backyard and connect to your parents and your grandparents. Because I think we don't talk about it that way. We don't talk about landscape and the memory of landscape in time, intergenerational time. Thank you.
It's really beautiful to bring it to that, time frame of generation to generation. Thank you for this legacy. Thank you so much.